The Tenant of Hellhole House by J.R. Dullard, as channeled through Bob Lever. Narrated by Lawrence Brown. There are those who are convinced that the supernatural exists, whilst still many more remain sceptical. I have long concluded that our position on the spectrum of belief or denial is dependent upon personal experience. For, just as there are those who are convinced by some higher power that our dear Lord died to save our immortal souls, there are many others who are equally certain that religion in any of its manifestations is a load of old bunkum. Up until the morning of December 6th, 1904, my experience of the supernatural, if one could call it such, had been mild to say the least, limited to such vaguely disturbing experiences as the cold shiver oft described by my German forebears by the idiom "als wäre gerade jemand über mein Grab gelaufen," as if someone walked over my grave, or one's ears burning because we are oft allegedly the topic of some unseen, disparaging tittle-tattle. And then there is coincidence. Coincidence that cannot easily be explained. Oh, coincidence! And so it was, on the aforementioned Tuesday morning in December, as I sat in the crowded compartment of the 7:15 from Birmingham to London Marylebone, observing the passenger seated opposite, engrossed in reading the latest edition of the Hatter's Gazette, that I somehow managed myself thinking of a former friend and student at Gaylord College, Oxbridge, one Tarquin Topper Middlewicket, a man who was as famed for his signature headgear as he had been for his considerable prowess on the wrestling match and rugby pitch. Topper and I had once been the fastest of friends, but the intervening years had taken us in different directions, and, to my deep regret, we had quite lost touch since our odd-shaped ball games of yore. Oh, dear, dear Topper, whatever happened to Topper? Imagine, then, my utter and complete astonishment when, not a half-hour later, as I exited from the relative warmth of the railway station onto the frosty thoroughfare of Malcolm Place, that I first spotted a top hat rising prominently above the bustling crowd. Shortly before, I all but bumped into my long-lost pal. Our look of mutual amazement was quickly replaced by the broadest of smiles. Even with the addition of a sporty moustache, it could not mask the unmistakably handsome countenance of Topper Middlewicket. He grasped my gloved hand, held it fast in his, and shook it warmly, saying, "Riddell, Jimmy Riddell, how the devil!" With cordial greetings exchanged, we hurriedly retired to an adjacent café, and over a cup of steaming hot chocolate made a rush to start on catching up for lost time. He remained a bachelor, he informed me, but a wealthy and successful one by the looks of his stylish attire, having established a doctor's practice in nearby Harley Street, where he specialized as therapeutic consultant to a coterie of wealthy hysterics. For my part, I told him that, after spending a number of years as a commissioned officer, I had returned to Civvy Street, and was currently a junior partner with Botham Cheeks and Clench, auctioneers and estate agents, with offices again a short distance away. Our time together was regrettably brief, as duty called us both, but we exchanged cards, with Topper insisting we meet that following Friday evening for dinner at his gentleman's club for a proper natter. And so I set off for my office with a lighter heart and a spring in my step. I had found London a lonely place since moving there upon leaving the regiment, and was happy to have this unexpected opportunity to re-establish ties with such a dear old friend here in the heart of the metropolis. Any light-heartedness I might have been experiencing was quickly dashed as I entered the office, only to be met by our senior clerk, one Mr. Ernst Skidmore, who, taking my coat and hat, regarded me condescendingly with a crooked eyebrow and his customary antipathy. "Mr. Botham has requested your presence in his office, sir," he said by way of greeting. I nodded and headed directly to said office of my senior, where I was to find him with his head down, engrossed in studying the letter that lay spread out before him. He spoke without looking up. "Ah, Riddell, you are returned. I trust you concluded the business in Birmingham successfully?" "I did indeed, sir, and returned on the first possible train," I replied. "It is good," he said, yet frowned. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Indeed, indeed." He finally looked up. "It is in regard to Hellhole House," he began. My heart sank at the very mention of the name. "It is that place we let to Major Minor, you remember it?" A rhetorical question, no doubt. I could hardly be expected to forget. "You will recall he took the accursed property on a long lease, and now," he indicated the letter, "claims he cannot live in it, and is threatening legal action if we will not tear up his contract. He further claims that his wife and daughter are so traumatized by their experiences within that, whilst he does not detail said events, he claims both will require extensive medical attention, and he expects us to reimburse him." "Legal action? On what grounds?" I inquired. "On the grounds that we did not advise him of the sinister reputation of the property." And here I held my tongue, for, indeed, I had suggested that specific course of action before the lease was signed, but who was I, a mere junior? That said, we'd struggled to find any tenant to take on the lease despite the attractions of said property and the extremely generous reduction of the rental fee. Consequently, my advice had been summarily disregarded. I did not blame Mr. Botham. I knew he felt an obligation to the owner of the property, a cousin of his wife, who had fallen on hard times and in the greatest need of any revenue the property might generate. This being the third occasion to my knowledge that such an occurrence had taken place, there seemed to me only one solution going forward: to rid the house of its damnable reputation. "Do you believe the house is haunted, sir?" I queried. "Pah!" he scoffed. "I do not believe in the supernatural." "Then might I venture a solution?" I did not wait for him to respond, but continued to the effect that I should like the opportunity to try to establish whether I could solve the mystery by taking up residence myself until such time as I could explain, or at least dispel, the Major's claims. I told him that I also did not believe in ghosts, and could not therefore be afraid of them. As to the matter of the mental welfare of the ladies, I suggested they meet for a consultation with my Harley Street doctor friend, who I was certain would get to the bottom of their complaints. And so it was agreed that, in want of any other solution, after making the necessary preparations, I would take up residence that coming Saturday, with the plan to remain until such time as a resolution could be found to the issue at hand. As had been mooted, I dined that Friday evening with Topper at the Gaylord Club on Pall Mall on what was to be the eve of my curious adventure. It was a sumptuous meal which, despite my protestations, Topper insisted was to be his treat, and, once replete, we retired to the elegant oak-lined smoking room to partake of after-dinner brandy and cigars. It was there, seated in a quiet corner, cozied up and virtually knee to knee, that I told Topper of the task upon which I was shortly to engage. "Hellhole House," Topper snorted jovially. "I would have thought the name alone would have been enough to put any prospective tenant off. Didn't the new owner think of changing the name to something a tad more marketable?" "Ah, and therein lies a tale," I informed him, for, in actuality, it is called Elmo House, but has acquired the sobriquet of Hellhole in the local due to its frightful reputation. "How very queer." "Queerer still, the legacy has come as a complete surprise to its present owners, it being inherited from an estranged and distant cousin, Zander Elmo." "Not the Zander Elmo, the infamous poet and novelist of occult literature, the one alleged to have—" I cut him short to save my blushes. "The very same, the black sheep and family reprobate with whom there had been no familial contact in a generation. Hardly surprising that the family would have distanced themselves, given his lurid reputation. Indeed, but here's the thing. Whilst Zander Elmo had accumulated wealth and notoriety during that long period of separation, his family had not, and, finding themselves in greatly reduced circumstances, were ready to bless him upon learning of their ill-gotten gain. And now?" Now they are convinced that the bequeathment is a cruel and unusual form of retaliation, so they cannot afford to live in it. Contractually, they are not allowed to sell it, and now, still, despite my company's best efforts, it cannot seem to be let for any period of time. Topper reached out then, placed a reassuring hand on my knee, and clasped it. Then it's a good job that the family have you as an ally. I looked down at his hand. It remained there. And if it is at all within my power to assist, I will. I should be more than happy to meet with the wife and daughter of the former tenant. Perhaps they can, indeed, shed further light on the events leading up to the abrupt termination of the lease. Of course, I am obligated to uphold doctor-patient confidentiality, he winked. But if I learn of anything that might place you in imminent danger, then rest assured that the obligation would no longer hold ground. I turned my attention then from focusing on his big, firm, meaty hand and looked him directly in the eye. Do you believe in ghosts, Topper? He smiled. You ask a man of science? Answering a question with a question is not an answer. He gave my knee another squeeze, released his grip, sat back, and adjusted his trouser leg. Let us just say, the human imagination is somewhat limited in my experience, and that there are many things unseen, things that are yet waiting to be discovered. Late morning the next day, I stood before the imposing red brick structure. Having sent my trunk, papers, and provisions ahead of me, I arrived alone, unburdened and in awe, for Elmo House certainly made a striking first impression. A goodly-sized mid-Victorian family townhouse in the French Gothic Revival style, it stood within its own walled garden in Nobham Park, a leafy suburb of Kensington and Chelsea. Having been commissioned by reprobate Zander Elmo in 1864 as his personal boat hole and his own peculiar taste. The house had an L-shaped plan and an interior of plain red brick with stone dressings, a roof of green slates, and was distinguished by a cylindrical tower to the right with conical roof. A weather vane stood proudly erect atop this. Strangely, perhaps, the house seemed to welcome, not repel me, as I first approached through the open gate on that cold and frosty Saturday in December. Welcome, at least, until I stood before the tall and heavy oak front door. For it is a fact that there was something particular about the door knocker, it being in the form of a grotesque mask, the hideous face of a horned devil with yawning mouth, replete with fangs, twisted in a silent scream, and likely to deter all but the most brave-hearted from hazarding to knock. Fortunately, I didn't have to knock, as I had the key. The knocker was, however, the only exterior indication of the bizarre grandiloquence of religiosity that lay within. The front door opened onto a double-height entrance hall with mosaic floor depicting a labyrinthine descent into the fiery furnace. The mural painted on the ceiling above was of heaven and all its angels, good and evil. A large stained glass window contained 4 classical male figures, undraped and in various stages of purgatory. As I went on to explore the property further, I was to discover each room had a biblical theme to the elaborate decoration. In the library, it was the tree of knowledge. In the drawing room, the end of days. In the master bedroom, the sins of the flesh. The windows of the stair turret vividly represented man's fall from grace. Built over 4 floors, the ground floor contained a drawing room, a dining room, and a library. The first floor had 3 bedrooms. The garret had whitewashed walls, bare floorboards, and minimal furniture, giving every indication of it having been servants' quarters. The dreary backstairs led down to the basement, which housed the kitchen and storerooms. What follows is the exchange of correspondence that details the developments of the forthcoming days. Mr. Riddell to Dr. Middlewicket, Elmo House, December 11th. My dear Topper, well, my friend, I took up residence at the accursed Hellhole at about 11:30 yesterday morning. As yet, I have nothing untoward to report, but as you requested regular updates, I am happy to oblige. I write to you from the suitably grand desk in the well-appointed library, its walls lined, as you might expect, with multiple bookcases. I have set a log fire blazing in the grate. There is even a large and comfortable daybed that I intend to utilize at night as my resting place for the duration. French windows offer a pleasant view of the garden at the rear of the house, with its mosaic terrace. At its centre is a statue reminiscent of the Belgian mannequin Pice, relieving himself into the fountain's basin. Though it has to be said that this boy is not petite by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and I confess I had to keep the doors shut in an attempt to drown out the deluge once I had re-engaged the pump. Victuals are being delivered daily, and I am not going hungry, though the delivery boy refuses to cross the threshold, and so I receive all deliveries at the servants' entrance. I have only recently returned from attending morning service at Nobham Old Church, where I had inquired of the Reverend in situ if he had the personal knowledge of Elmo House and its nefarious reputation. He advised that he was relatively new in post, but directed me to the local physician, amateur historian, and parishioner, Dr. Isaiah Kite, who, fortunately, was also in attendance, and has kindly agreed to meet with me here tonight. Your attached, Jimmy. P.S. Was it not God himself who cautioned us, "It is not good for man to be alone," Genesis 2:18? The deep and abiding need for companionship refers not only to marriage, I think, but also to meaningful friendships of all kinds. And though I am alone at Elmo House, I am not lonely because I know you are with me in spirit as I am with you. Dr. Middlewicket to Mr. Riddell, Parley Street, December 13th. Dearest Jimmy, I was delighted to have word from you and to learn that all seems to be quiet, if not entirely convivial, at your temporary accommodation. I trust no disturbance has subsequently occurred. You will perceive that this is but a short note written at speed, but not, I assure you, from dearth of affection, but of time. I've had to hastily rearrange my consultation schedule so as to accommodate Mrs. and Miss Minor at the earliest opportunity, as per your wish. You will, I hope, be pleased to hear I am meeting with them both tomorrow, Wednesday 14th, and would hope to update you shortly thereafter. In the meantime, I'm rushed off my feet. Oh, for the tranquillity you seem to be experiencing at Elmo House. Another knock at the door. Peace is a word that might as well be expunged from this humble physician's vocabulary. Do keep me posted on any and all developments or lack thereof. I remain affectionately yours, Topper. Mr. Riddell to Dr. Middlewicket, Elmo House, December 14th. My dear Topper, with your indulgence, I shall pick up from where I left off. Dr. Kite arrived around 5 p.m., by which time I had been able to rustle up quite the culinary feast, if I do say so myself. Said practitioner and local historian is quite ancient himself, but assures me he was young once, and, whilst being elderly to the point of decrepit, his mental faculties do not seem to have diminished beyond reasonable doubt. This was to be my good fortune, as he was in a position to elaborate on certain historical facts and further expand my knowledge considerably. And it was after dinner, as we relaxed by the fire, that he shared the following. I am reliably informed that the site attracted its sinister reputation upon construction, that someone as perverse, eccentric, and moneyed as Zander Elmo had moved into the district had been unexpected, and had set tongues wagging immediately, Kite declared. The locals had shuddered at its very presence, and the abode had acquired its sobriquet shortly upon completion, Elmo and Hellhole being too easy to repurpose and pervert. Alongside his literary output, Elmo gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime for being a drug user, a rampant Uranian, and a heretic. In retirement at Hellhole House, he indulged his passions wholeheartedly. As founder of the Outer Order of the Golden Shower, he practiced ceremonial magic with his followers and had regularly hosted drunken orgies where participants would be naked for the duration of their stay. Such events became notorious amongst the locals who, it appears, would spy through any crack in the curtains and at every opportunity. Elmo passed away at the age of 92 of pneumonia resulting from chronic obsessive nudism. It was Dr. Kite himself who had been in charge with the thankless task of signing the death certificate. In a final indignity, Elmo's ashes were stolen during the Black Mass celebrating his ignominious life and later discovered to have been scattered over the midden. I must have looked quite shell-shocked once he had finished his tale, as the doctor grew quite solicitous, and taking a bottle of medicine from his bag, implored me to take a spoonful or two to calm my nerves. I then explained to the doctor how it had subsequently proven impossible to secure a long-term resident for reasons as yet to be determined, and I informed him of my mission. He wished me good luck with that. Once the doctor had taken his leave, I prepared for bed. It was raining furiously, and I fell asleep to the distant sounds of rolling thunder. I slept fitfully thereafter, and, waking to the sound of an ear-shattering, gut-wrenching thunderclap, was surprised to find myself stark naked, halfway up the grand staircase. I had no memory of how I had come to be there in such a state of undress, but with the distant impression that I was not entirely alone and under minute observation. I admit I am quite shaken by the event, which passes all understanding. Your attached, Jimmy. Dearest Jimmy, yesterday I had the dubious pleasure of meeting with Mrs. and Miss Minor, the elder of the two being the archetypal fire-breathing dragon and quite a challenge, whilst the young is one but pretty and exceedingly passive, to the point of being monosyllabic. I will not alarm you with the catalogue of ghostly happenings that I was informed of at length at this moment in time, for fear of putting ideas into your subconscious. Suffice to say, Mrs. M. was adamant these incidents took place and that, as a result, she herself suffers from regular bouts of constipation and hysteria, whilst her previously outgoing and cheerful daughter has become a pale shadow of her former self. Throughout, Miss M. only indicated agreement with a faint nod or mumbled word. Yet I came to the conclusion that there was more to their experience than meets the eye, and consequently sought a private interview with the younger of the two. Despite her mother's objections, I have arranged to see Miss M. alone this following Friday, my hope being that having separated her from her somewhat overbearing matriarch, it might free her up to be more forthcoming. Again, I apologize for the brevity of this missive, but I'm attempting to clear the decks. At any rate, I do intend to visit you this weekend, as promised earlier. I should arrive late Friday evening, so be sure to make up a bed. Please don't trouble yourself to prepare supper. I'll dine before I leave. Hopefully by that time I shall be able to provide you with further information that you'll be able to use to your advantage. Affectionately yours, Topper. Had I replied, the letter would not have reached Topper before his planned visit. Instead, I awaited his arrival expectantly. As the temperature outside dropped incrementally throughout the Friday afternoon and early evening, rain turned to sleet and quickly morphed into snow. The snow quickly began to settle, only then to be tossed by winter winds, whipping the snowfall into blizzard-like conditions. It was at this point, as I stared into the drama unfolding beyond the French doors, that I began to doubt whether Topper would arrive as promised. It seemed unlikely that anyone would succeed on such a night. I paced the library and waited. Paced some more, waited some more. Eventually, when the hall clock struck 11, all hope died. Resigning myself fearfully to passing another night alone, I admit I took a double dose of my nerve medicine. I then piled more logs onto the fire before undressing and retrieved my nightshirt from under the pillow on the bed, intending to warm it before the flames before putting it on. I held it towards the flickering fire, and in the action was met with an audible whoop as the flames flared and shot up the chimney, and I heard, or thought I heard, somewhere above my head, a distant rumbling, then cackling, followed by high-pitched ringing laughter, disembodied voices, strange noises that could not be explained in an otherwise empty house. The tumult ceased with the very instant that there came the clatter of the front door knocker, echoing throughout the very house in its entirety. Convulsed with terror, I hoisted the nightshirt over my head, rushed out into the empty hallway, and threw open the front door. "Hell's teeth," Topper explained, open-mouthed, gazing upon my shocked countenance. "What on earth?" I immediately swooned in relief at the sight of him and fell into his muscular arms, having lost all of my senses in the instant. I regained consciousness once I had been carried to the library and placed in a winged-backed chair beside the fire. A blanket had been tucked around my lower half. The stimulus of the medicinal administration of brandy from the hip flask tipped gently to my lips revived me. The sweet, fruity liquor, with its hint of the woody tones from the casket in which it had once been stored, arousing me to consciousness again. Topper put the flask in my hand before shaking the snow from his signature top hat and cape, placing them on the antlers of a stag's head that was stationed conveniently on the wall beside the ornate fireplace, but within arm's reach. "Rest. You need rest," Topper urged me as he opened his portmanteau, placed upon the desk, and began to strip off his sodden outer garments. I averted my eyes and gazed into the fire. "But I need to tell you all that has happened since our last exchange." "And I you," he replied. Then, after a moment, "You look like death." "I feel like death," I lamented. "Well, at the very least, I may be able to put your mind at rest on one important point." "Yes?" I asked, turning my eyes towards him, catching sight of his firm, round, naked buttocks as he shuffled the nightshirt over his head. "Yes," he replied, pulling on his bed socks and nightcap before turning towards me. "I applied my skill as therapeutic hypnotist on Miss Minor at our private consultation this afternoon, and, you'll be relieved to hear, your company owes the Minor family nothing." "Nothing?" "The unscrupulous parties involved knew full well of this property's reputation in advance of their occupancy, and fully intended to profit by it. Alas, they got more than they bargained for when ghostly events overrode their machinations." A measure of relief washed over me, but then there was this other matter. "Tell me of the nature of the ghostly events," I pleaded. "In daylight," he replied somberly. "Now, let us get you to bed." "Will you stay with me?" I asked, my lip trembling. He nodded. "Then double lock the library door." Fortunately, the daybed was large enough to accommodate us both, but it was equally fortunate that we were friends at Eld, and there was little room to maneuver. And so, reassured by his manly presence, I clung to him as we fell asleep. I awoke feeling like I had done 10 rounds with a bare-knuckle boxer. My body battered and bruised. My head ached. The smell of bacon and egg in my nostrils somehow rousing me to consciousness. Topper had brought breakfast to my bedside. I tried to sit up, but needed his assistance and the strategic placement of pillows to do so. He laid the breakfast tray before me and watched devotedly as I struggled to eat. "You do not recall the events of last night, I think?" he asked. I shook my head and winced at the effort. "Vaguely, you will have to fill in the detail." He described then how he had woken in the night to find himself alone. The log fire burned down, the library door lay wide open. He had risen and, with some significant trepidation, followed the trail of my discarded clothing that led the way into the hall. Bed socks, cap, and nightshirt lay discarded and forlorn, and all leading towards the hall stairs. Echoing up the stairwell, then came a gut-wrenching scream and the thump, thump, thump of a heavy object in free fall. He had sprinted up the staircase 2, 3, 4 steps at a time, bare feet slapping on oak, only to find me lying prostrate and naked on the floor of the obscenely decorated bedroom, as silent as a stone. Falling down alongside me, he had tried and failed to revive me by calling my name, then, clamping his mouth upon mine, had made a valiant attempt to bring me back to life. Moments had ticked by, and he had begun to despair, and then, startled, my eyes had shot open, mouth-to-mouth ventilation, I had mumbled apparently. He had nodded, as his tears dropped from his eyes onto my cheeks. "That's quite the technique you have there," I had observed, though had no recollection. Who knew you had such a therapeutic tongue? We had laughed then, with blessed relief, and, after embracing tightly in a brotherly fashion, for a long, lingering moment of intense affection, he had supported me, guided me back to the library, before helping me on to bed, and redressing me before climbing in alongside me. Sleep had overcome us quickly. Once the last morsel of the delicious breakfast repast had been consumed, I fixed Topper with a meaningful stare. "You promised to inform me of all you had discovered since our last correspondence." "And you, I." "What of Mrs. and Miss Minor?" Topper grimaced. Under hypnotic interrogation, young Miss Minor admitted that she and her mother had been repeatedly disturbed night after night, only to discover themselves, either alone or as a pair, rudely awakened while sleepwalking, and found themselves naked on the main staircase. I shuddered then, my worst fears confirmed. Topper placed his thumbs in his waistcoat pockets and began to pace. "You'll be relieved to hear that under hypnotic suggestion I was able to persuade Miss Minor to have her family abandon any legal claim for fear of incarceration." "How can I ever thank you?" I asked. "We can decide that later. For now, it would appear that there is horror at work, and we will need to rid the house of it, or it will never be let." Understandably, I was curious as to what exactly triggered the seismic shift from a premeditated scam to a genuine, unadulterated terror, and so I probed deeper. It transpired that the events had begun to occur at around the same time that a certain Dr. Isaiah Kite had been invited by the family to dinner, their plan being so he could later testify to their fell anxiety. Oddly, however, rather than reassure them, he took the opportunity to inform them of the gruesome history attached to the dwelling, and, with the woman's distress clearly escalating, he had prescribed them both a bottle of nerve medicine, which he was fortunate to have readily to hand. I tried to sit up, but fell back in pain. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that you lie and recuperate whilst I go and call your physician to attend." Placing his top hat on his head, he gave it a tap. "But you are a doctor." "Yes," Topper replied with a smile. "Unfortunately, Dr. Kite does not know that." I must have fallen into a doze, as the next thing I heard was the clack-clack-clack of Dr. Kite's walking stick as he entered the library. He stood at my bedside, looking down. "Your brother tells me you had a fall." "My brother? Yes." At this point, Dr. Kite tossed my bedclothes aside, hoiked my nightshirt up to my chest, and began to examine me minutely. "Nothing life-threatening," he concluded, covering me again, "though you may likely make some lucky woman very happy." "Might he not benefit from another dose of your nerve tonic, Doctor?" Topper said, leaning over his shoulder. He polished off the last. "Indeed, indeed," Kite replied, reaching into his bag, producing another bottle of the elixir. Topper plucked the bottle from his grasp and regarded the label. Caution, it says, may cause drowsiness, only to be taken before bed. Then it is fortunate he is in bed, replied Kite, dryly. As opposed to halfway up the hall stairs, Topper posited. What are you suggesting, sir? Kite replied indignantly. Yes, what are you suggesting, Topper? I asked, bemused. You never asked why I was late last night, Jimmy. Why, no, I thought the weather— Well, yes, there was that, he replied. But in addition, I had found it necessary to make a slight detour to visit an expert apothecary I know. You see, the most common prescription for hysteria is laudanum, a combination of opium, herbs, and alcohol. Hysteria? I exclaimed. Yes, a form of group hysteria in this case, if I'm not much mistaken, and a form of hysteria only exacerbated by the particular concoction herein. Said apothecary confirmed this potion, the drugs of which I had fortunately retrieved from Miss Miner's own prescription, has long been discredited for causing night terrors, hallucinations, and a rise in body temperature sufficient to prompt the removal of all clothing. Thereafter, following my supposition, I called in to check the local church records, and the question that most readily followed on is, what possessed you, Dr. Kite? What possessed me? He replied indignantly. Yes, given you are the only connecting factor, what possessed you? Dr. Kite began to snigger, then cackle, and finally to laugh, full-throated. It was a hideous sound, and reminiscent of the noises I had heard overhead. Just as I suspected, Topper crowed. You were a disciple of Xander Elmer, were you not, Dr. Kite? Dr. Kite sneered. And you felt obliged to keep his memory alive, but you have outlived your usefulness. Outlived? Screeched the doctor. Yes, outlived, Topper replied. For according to church records, you are 153 years old. The doctor blanched and, shaking his fists, rose unsteadily to his feet. Then, clutching his chest, with one last gasp, he promptly crumbled into a festering pile of skin and bone, a pile that was to be easily swept up and taken as one last act of kindness to join its master upon the midden. Any supernatural occurrences ended with his demise, and the family that next took up occupancy live there to this day, having extended their lease indefinitely. Whilst Topper is unconvinced that there were any supernatural elements to the strange events, attributing them to the consequence of a mental aberration, I am not entirely convinced. Still, it wouldn't do for us all to think the same, and the outcome of events cemented my deep and abiding affection for my dear Topper. And we have remained inseparable from that day to this.